Let's start with that breaking news this hour. Very important breaking news because an official Hamas source has told the BBC that it does accept a proposal for a ceasefire deal in Gaza. Now, Israel has yet to comment on that. We'll bring you more details on it as soon as we get them. Meanwhile, Palestinian civilians have started leaving parts of eastern Rafah in Gaza after Israel told 100,000 people there to leave the area. Officials in Gaza say Israeli airstrikes have targeted parts of Rafah just hours after that evacuation order was issued. Pictures we've received show thick smoke rising as displaced Palestinians try to flee eastern Rafah. Now, those Palestinian civilians closest to the Israeli border are being urged to move to what the Israeli military, the IDF, calls expanded humanitarian zones in the Al-Mawasi and Khan Yunis areas. Well, let's just go back to those live pictures of people in Gaza, in the centre of Gaza, actually getting that news that there looks like Hamas have confirmed that they have accepted the ceasefire proposals. As we say, no confirmation yet of that from Israel. So let's go straight to our security correspondent, Frank Gardner, who's in Jerusalem for us. Well, Frank, Hamas saying that they have accepted the ceasefire proposals. We don't know what Israel thinks about this yet, but what would that mean potentially?
Two crucial things here, Ben. One, are those proposals the same ones that Israel essentially agreed to? The ones that were on the table during the weekend at the Cairo talks, which were a 40-day pause in the fighting, a return of Palestinians to northern Gaza to their homes, and an exchange of roughly 33 Israeli hostages out of captivity in Gaza in return for an undisclosed number of Palestinians out of Israeli jails. Those were broadly the terms that we think were on the table. Do we know if this deal that has been accepted by Hamas is the same one? Is it the same terms? We don't know yet. Second thing is Israel going to sign up on this? Is it going to sign up to it? Because if the terms are different, then it's quite possibly going to get rejected by the Israeli side. And those wonderful celebrations you saw there in Rafah and Gaza Strip could be premature.
Of course, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is under huge pressure, isn't he, to get the remaining hostages out. And many people would say that a ceasefire deal is the best way to get those hostages out.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, the only time we've seen large numbers of hostages released out of Gaza have been with a negotiated deal by Qatar and Egypt with the support of the United States. And that appears to be what's going on now, because the message, and we're basing all of this on a genuine, one single but genuine posting on social media by Hamas saying that their political leader, Ismail Haniyeh, has telephoned the Qatari Prime Minister, Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdurrahman Al Thani, and Abbas Kamel, the head of Egyptian intelligence, to say that Hamas accepts the ceasefire proposal. So we don't yet know what the Israeli reaction is. The Israeli media has been pretty cautious about it, saying that if the terms are different, then it's not going to be acceptable to the Israeli cabinet. And let's just remind ourselves what the sticking point was at the weekend, why those peace talks, those ceasefire talks collapsed or stalled. And that is that Hamas insisted on an undertaking by Israel that this would be a full and final ceasefire. In other words, it would be an end to the fighting and Israel would withdraw. Israel said, we're not going to commit to that because it would leave Hamas's battalions intact and allow them to regroup and attack us again. What mediators have been saying, both during the weekend and subsequently to Hamas, is, look, take the 40-day deal. You know, if you don't take that, nothing's going to happen. The idea is to build on the 40-day deal, to make another 40-day truce and another one beyond that, and eventually it becomes a permanent ceasefire. But if you don't make a start, then nothing is going to happen.
And just give us an idea of who exactly is mediating in these various ceasefire negotiations that we've been having.
It's very much Egyptian-led. I mean, the Qataris are involved. Qatar is, of course, the home in Doha, its capital, to the political leadership of Hamas, something that is pretty controversial because it's a weird situation. You've got Qatar that is home to the largest US military base in the Middle East at Al Udeid. It's also home to what is the political wing of a proscribed terrorist organization, prescribed by the US and many other countries. But it's the Egyptians that have been driving this one, and it's Egyptian intelligence. Remember that Egypt borders Gaza. They've got a vested interest in seeing calm restored. The last thing they want is to see the violence spill over their borders into the northern Sinai, which has already suffered a lot of violence from ISIS that's been attacking Egyptian army positions. There's no love lost between the Egyptian government, which is very secular, and Hamas, which is a religious movement, a political religious movement. But the Egyptians have been driving this. They want very much to see this deal succeed, and that's why Hamas's message mentioned Abbas Kamel, the head of Egyptian intelligence, who has been instrumental in trying to get this deal over the line.
And Frank, just looking at the timing of this, I mean, this acceptance by Hamas of the ceasefire deal, it comes on the same day that we've had heightened reports that there could be an imminent Israeli military offensive ground assault on Rafah. We've had those evacuation orders dropped by flyers on Palestinian civilians, telling them to get out of eastern Rafah ahead of what could be an imminent Israeli assault. Do you think that could be connected to what Hamas now have agreed to?
Well, certainly I think hardliners and others in the military here in the Israeli establishment will be saying, you see, military pressure works. The threat of military action has made them capitulate. I'm not sure that's how Hamas would see it, because after all, yesterday they fired a load of rockets at the Kerem Shalom crossing point, killing 4 Israeli soldiers. Israel has been conducting airstrikes in Rafah. Certainly the prospect of a major military operation in Rafah has appalled international aid agencies, and the US for that matter. So President Biden, only a couple of hours ago, held a 30-minute phone call with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The readout of that was released to the media was unbelievably short and uninformative. Most of it was about Holocaust Remembrance Day. One line in it referring to Rafah, saying the president made clear his views on Rafah. Well, we know what those views are, and it's frankly, don't do it. The US does not believe that Israel can undertake a military operation in a place with 1.4 million people, 2/3 of whom are already displaced from northern Gaza, without severe harm to those civilians.
Frank, you were saying at the start that, of course, we have to wait and hear and wait and see what Israel's reaction to this is. And we have just received a report while you've been talking to us from the Reuters news agency, quoting an Israeli official, unnamed Israeli official, saying that Hamas have approved a, quote, softened Egyptian proposal that is not, repeat, not acceptable to Israel. So the initial, and that's just on the Reuters news agency, but they're quoting an Israeli official saying that this deal that Hamas have agreed to is not acceptable to Israel because it's based on a softened Egyptian proposal.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me, and that's very depressing because, I kind of feared as much, because certainly when the talks collapsed at the weekend, there was still considerable distance between the Hamas position and the Israeli position. The Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has been absolutely adamant that Israel will not commit now or at any time to an end to hostilities. Why? Because they think that this is unfinished business and there are 4 battalions of Hamas still alive and intact, and they want to finish them off. At the same time, they want the hostages out. Now, those 2 aims, I think, are incompatible with each other. The best way to get hostages out of captivity in Gaza is through a deal. But there are people in the Security Cabinet and the War Cabinet here in Israel, or certainly there are hardliners in this country and in the government, who don't want to see a deal. Instead, they want to see a hard military push into Rafah that in some way finishes off Hamas. I'm not sure that that is achievable, and it's certainly not going to get a lot of hostages out alive.
Yeah, and just one additional line from Reuters, Frank, that I will just put to you, but it just amplifies that earlier report I was reading out from the Reuters news agency. That Israeli official who's already said that these proposals are not acceptable to Israel says the proposal includes, quote, far-reaching conclusions that Israel does not agree to. So that does look like, initially at least, confirmation that Israel isn't going to go along with these proposals, even if Hamas is.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost certainly concerning the end state, because Hamas are saying, look, you know, it's unrealistic to give up their key bargaining chip, the hostages, only to find themselves attacked the very next day. Now, I mean, you know, Hamas is a proscribed terrorist organization. They've committed absolute atrocities in southern Israel on October the 7th, but they've been quite canny militarily, and they are in quite a strong bargaining position because they still hold somewhere upwards of 90 hostages who are thought to be alive. The pressure on Prime Minister Netanyahu here is mounting to get those hostages out. Every night I drive past protesters who are waving banners saying, bring them home, do more, make it a priority. The protesters, and they numbered tens of thousands a couple of nights ago in Tel Aviv, they don't believe that the Israeli government is doing enough to get them out. They don't think it's a priority for this government. They think this government's priority is to get tough on Hamas and fight it and beat it and crush it into the ground, and that the hostages are a secondary priority.
Frank, very good to have you with us for that instant analysis. That's Frank Gardner, our security correspondent, live with the very latest from Jerusalem on that Hamas acceptance of ceasefire proposals. But as we've just been hearing, according to the Reuters news agency, Israel does not accept those proposals and isn't likely to. And Frank Gardner, they're just giving us his analysis. Well,